What's up everyone, it's Victon with another Path of Exile build guide. Today we're going to be going over a Freezing Pulse Totem Hierophant. And let me tell you, I was actually pretty surprised at how much insane damage this done for how little play it's getting this league. A min-maxed build will get you about 56 million shaper DPS. It's going to cost you about 60 to 100 exalts for that damage, but I will go over a budget build and kind of a middle of the pack build that's going to get you about 30 million shaper DPS. That mixed with freezing everything, it's also pretty safe to play. So a great build that I've currently cleared all the content with in the game. I've killed Cyrus 8, Uber Elder, and I've actually completed all my 36 league challenges to get the portal with this character. Now, before we get into everything though, if you do end up enjoying this guide, do consider subscribing and liking the video. I have several other Harvest League build guides already up and several more to come before the league's over. Also, I like to go ahead and show you guys some gameplay footage in the background while we discuss a few things for the build. Y'all can kind of just see what it looks like in action and decide if it's something that you think that you might enjoy playing. So yeah, let's go ahead and roll that and then we'll jump right into things. Alright, so just a few quick bits before we get into the build itself. How I like to do my build guides is a little bit different than others. I try and make mine a little bit shorter. I feel like some of those 30-minute build guides out there, while they're pretty awesome, can be a bit overwhelming for some of the newer players. And for the experienced players, y'all kind of just want to see what it looks like in action and then grab that POB leak and roll with it if it's something that you like. Now, even though I'm keeping it a bit shorter, don't worry, I still will get you everything that you need to know how to build this character, level it up, and understand how it does damage and builds defense. Now, some of you might be concerned when you see how little effective EHP this build has for a character that's crushing in-game content. In fact, it's only got just under 5k effective life. But don't worry, it's actually okay. Being ranged and having 4 totems to soak up damage for you and also freezing everything on your screen, it's actually pretty safe to play. I wouldn't say this is a hardcore character, sadly, but I do very rarely die with it, and when I do die, it's because I'm playing recklessly watching Netflix while dashing straight into a giant pack of mobs, but even then, I still rarely die. And like I said, it can have 30, 40, 50 million shaper DPS, so you typically knock out boss phases in only a few seconds anyway. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention is obviously Harvest League lets you make some insane gear, so these DPS numbers won't be around for next leagues, I think, but the core of the build won't ever change, and in my opinion, it's always going to be strong. Anyways, with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the passive skill tree. Alright, so we'll be using the desktop app Path of Building. Now, if you don't have it already, a download link will be in the description, and I'd highly recommend getting it because pretty much every Path of Exile build does use this. What you're going to want to do is go up here to Import, Export, Build, and then click Import from Pastebin. And then go back to this video, and in the description you're going to find the POB Pastebin link and copy it, and then paste it back in this box and click Import, and you will be good to go. Now, the way I lay out my POBs, I actually have a leveling guide kind of in the Path of Building for your skill point selections and for your ascendancy points. Just click down here and you'll be able to go from your first lab all the way to your final build and see where again you spend your points and your ascendancy points from start to finish. And in the spirit of shorter build guides, like I said, I do like to not dive too deep into the tree, but I do want to go over every node here that is very important, and I will mention the main focuses and big keystones that you're going to be taking. So as you're leveling up, the first node that you're going to want to go towards is Ancestral Bond for that extra totem. I actually did level this character up playing Freezing Pulse Totems, and it was totally fine. I had a Tabula for the 6th link and 2 leveling crit wands with flat spell damage on them and was crushing all the axe. Anyways, you'll see right now I don't actually path up to Ancestral Bond, and that is because I have a very large ring Thread of Hope. But don't worry if you don't have that, it's totally fine. Go ahead and just path up to it normally, especially if you're leveling up, because you're going to have some spare points because you won't have both sets of your large cluster jewels to fill out yet. Now from there I just went up and around grabbing damage and a bit of life here and there, as well as mana too. We are going mind over matter and end up with just over 2,000 mana. Since we have so many uniques with little to no life on them, grabbing some mana goes a long way here. From there, we just get lots of crit and cast speed. Cast speed is actually a big way that we're going to be scaling damage in this build. We also have the Pain Attunement node, which you don't need until you have the Coward's Legacy belt, which makes you count as low life while cursed with vulnerability. But since we also run an Xeri's Reflection Shield, it doesn't matter since we're actually curse immune. More on that though in the gear section. Now once you get into late game and in game, you're going to start filling out your 2 large cluster jewels. Both large cluster jewels will be the same actually. You're going to want Vengeful Commander, Blanketed Snow, and increased cast speed with cold skills. For your medium cluster jewels, you're going to want one with Astonishing Affliction and Cold Conduction. This is a huge damage boost, making your chills also shock, and we're chilling 100% of the time, so they're always also going to be shocked. For the other 3 medium cluster jewels, you're going to want one passive as Repeater, and for the second passive, you can either get Streamlined or Eye to Eye. They're both roughly the same amount of damage, so you can pick whichever one you prefer. For all of my medium and large cluster jewels, I ended up spending about 4 to 5x to just straight up purchase them, so not too bad. And for the jewels, you want 3 crit multi rolls and a life percent rolls. These are actually insane and really only possible because of the Harvest League, at least at the price that I bought them for. They only cost me about 2x each, and then I harvest crafted life on them all myself. If you can't get one with the 3 crit multi rolls, then just go ahead and get 2 crit multi rolls instead of the 3, and you'll be totally fine. We're also running a First Snow for additional Freezing Pulse projectiles. I'd say go ahead and get this early on. In fact, rush to it after you get Ancestral Bond while you're leveling up. It's going to help a ton. Ideally, you want one with the Corrupting Blood cannot be afflicted on you implicit, but if you can't grab that because it's too expensive, no worries, just grab one with Cold Penetration. These are actually pretty cheap, only 20C or so with that Cold Penetration, so not too bad. We also have a Self-Flagellation, and you want one with the 20%, which gives us a ton of extra damage comboed with being immune to curses from our shield like I said earlier. Having all of these curses on you before you start a boss ups your DPS by about 2 to 3 million DPS, so quite substantial. Lastly, for jewels, we do have a Watcher's Eye. I have one with Cold Penetration, and enemies on consecrated ground take 10% more damage, which goes really nicely with my Bottled Faith, or if you don't have the currency for that, any Sulfur Flask to get that consecrated ground effect will be just fine. You could also get a Watcher's Eye with crit multi while affected by Precision, and or cold damage to spells while affected by Hatred. There's actually quite a few different options. I think the Watcher's Eye that I have only cost me about 3x, so I kind of went with the budget version of that. With a min-maxed Watcher's Eye, you could get an additional 2 to 3 million Shaper DPS. It would just be the Watcher's Eye that I have, plus crit multi while affected by Precision on top of that. But those are about 60 exalts plus, so not really worth it in my opinion. Now for Ascendancy, we are going to go with Hierophant here as is the best option, and the first path that we take is going to be up into Pursuit of Faith for an additional totem, and then to a Ritual of Awakening, which makes you put down 2 totems at once instead of 1, and some totem placement speed, so huge quality of life. Third, we're going to go with Conviction of Power for power and endurance charge generation and some defense. And lastly, we're going to get Divine Guidance for some nice defenses from all the mana that we have. And one last thing before we move on here, just a reminder that when you see in the DPS, it's not going to say 56 million, it'll say 14 million, but remember that's per totem. So it actually does come out to that 56 million like I mentioned in the beginning. Alright, so that's it for the skill tree. Now let's move on to the gem setups. First and foremost is of course Freezing Pulse, and our 4 link is going to be Freezing Pulse, Added Cold Damage, Controlled Destruction, and Hypothermia. Our 5th link we're going to add in Cold Penetration, and our 6th link we're going to add in Empower. For our buffs, we do have Zealotry and Hatred in Essence Worms, which makes them not reserve any mana. We have a Curse on Hit set up with Stormbrand, Curse on Hit, and Projectile Weakness, but if you have a Curse on Hit level 5 Awakened Gem, then you're going to get an additional curse, so on top of that we're going to add in Assassin's Mark. We have a level 1 cast when damage taken set up with Cold Snap and Bone Chill to debuff bosses mainly to take more damage. Our movement skill is Flame Dash linked with Second Wind, an increased duration, and Arcane Surge level 6, which is again going to give us a big damage boost. We also have another boss debuff with a self-cast Frost Bomb, making the boss take more cold damage. We also run a Lightning Golem for some additional cast speed, and lastly we run Steel Skin with increased duration for some additional tankiness because, like I mentioned earlier, our effective HP is a little bit low, so having that Steel Skin extra shield is going to actually go quite a long way. And that's it for our skills, so let's go ahead and move on to our gear. Now, our gear is actually pretty straightforward for the most part and will rarely deviate in any league. What we're going to be doing here is running a Soul Mantle chest, which are actually crazy cheap 6 links in the beginning and middle points of the league. And ideally you want one with a +1 to level of socketed gems, which is going to be a ton of extra damage as the corruption. But it's okay if you don't have that yet, not a big deal. This chest is going to give us another totem, bringing us to 4 maximum totems, and it also comes with a level 20 spell totem gem on it, which frees up a gem slot for us to put on extra damage. Now, what the chest does is it makes you take a curse anytime one of your totems expires or dies, which is pretty much all the time, and normally that would be a really bad thing, but what we're going to do here is combo that with the Adziri's Reflection Shield to be curse immune. So it negates all of those curses being put on you and is totally fine. Adziri's reflections are typically between 10 and 15 exalts in a league, so until you get that shield, you could also do the budget option and use 2 Kikazaru rings instead, which makes a combined total of 80% curse effect reduction. And those 2 rings mixed with the node Sanctum of Thought is going to bring you up to 100% curse immunity. Much cheaper than the Adziri's Reflection Shield, but it does limit you to not being able to use those 2 Essence Worms rings, so your mana pool is going to be much lower. And like I said earlier, the belt Coward's Legacy is perfect for this build. It's going to give you 30% more damage, so you definitely want to get this one. For our wand, we are running a pretty crazy Harvest Crafted wand with spell damage, cast speed, crit chance, and multi, and +1 to spell gems and +1 to cold gems. You can get this wand in other leagues too, it's just going to be much harder to hit everything and thus much more expensive. I straight up paid 30 exalts for this wand. If you don't have the currency for that, you can always just get away with a spell crit and crit multi spell damage wand for only an X or 2. And once you add in the cast speed, it gets a little bit more expensive, and then adding the plus to level of gems, obviously it's going to get even more expensive at that point, so just kind of go as you're leveling up your character and building your character. For our helmet, we are again using a crazy crafted helm with flat cold and lightning spell damage, life, 1 resist, nearby enemies have -9 cold resistance, and nearby enemies take increased elemental damage. By far the 2 biggest affixes here are the added flat spell damage, so aim for those first as the cheaper option, and then you can add on the nearby enemies to have -9 cold resistance as a little bit more expensive option. And this of course on a helm with 12% increased freezing pulse cast speed enchant, which is the best option. For your gloves, we're going to be going with cast speed, life, and resists, and for the expensive option, we're also going to add in chance to unnerve, and crafted damage during flash effect. For your boots, this is where I tried to get as much resistances as possible and move speed. I made sure to do it on a boot base with the lab enchant 10% increased elemental resistance penetration. I just bought the base here for a couple exalts and then crafted them myself. For your amulet, I went with one that has +1 to cold gems and +1 to intelligence gems, life, crit multi, and cast speed, and then I crafted minimum frenzy charge for the last affix. Now for all of these items, I did go over them pretty quickly, but if there's any that y'all want specifically a crafting guide for, just go ahead and let me know in the comments and I'll try my best to go ahead and put together one and post it for you guys. For our flasks, we're going to be going with a Bottled Faith for a ton of extra damage and crit chance, but if you can't afford that, then just go with a regular sulfur flask to proc your Watcher's Eye. From there, I got a basic move speed Quicksilver flask, and then a Blood of the Karui for your life flask, or you could just go with any regular life flask with staunching to get that remove bleed. I did go with an enduring mana flask of staunching though, to pretty much be 100% immune to bleed since your mana flask is always rolling all the time with that enduring affix. And lastly, I had a diamond flask where I crafted additional crit chance during flask effect. And that about covers it for the gear section, which brings us to the conclusion of the build guide. Overall, this build far surpassed my expectations and ended up doing so much damage. It's a bit squishy, so not a hardcore build, but with how much damage you do and freezing everything, it is actually still pretty safe build. I was able to level up to 95 with ease, very rarely dying. And for a mid to end of the league build, it actually didn't cost too much either. So I would definitely recommend this if y'all are looking for a totem build specifically. This is the one that you want. I would definitely say that Freezing Pulse is also the skill that you want as well for totems right now. I tried a few different options like Frostbolt and Arc, but Freezing Pulse was definitely the best. Anyways, like I mentioned in the beginning, if you ended up enjoying this guide or any of my other Path of Exile guides, do consider subscribing and liking the video and checking out my channel. I have a bunch of other Harvest League build guides already and several more coming in the next few weeks before the league is over. Thanks everyone, and I will see you on the next one.